You studied with the world-famous and celebrated conductor, teacher, and music theoretician, Ilya Alexandrovich Musin. There are a lot of other famous conductors also who studied with him, such as Rudolf Baschai, Maris Jansons. Can you please tell us a bit about him for the people? I presume he's not very familiar with you. So can you tell us something about the man? And
Ilya Musin is one of the dearest people in my life. He is one of those few that I would say a father figure. Of course, I had a biological father that I loved deeply, and then there were several personalities that affected me and influenced me throughout my life, and Ilya Musin was one of those few. He was an extraordinary man because he's been teaching since 1920s, and he passed away at the end of 1990s. You can imagine thousands of pupils that he taught over those decades. But it's not only about that. He was literally the first one who actually has been able to formulate conducting as an art form, not only in a technical sense. But imagine that when we are watching ballet dancers, they're expressing something non-verbally through silent gestures, if you will, and they tell us a story. Conducting gesture is meant to be the same. It should convey the spirit of the music to the musicians who would be led by a conductor and also transmit themselves to the audience. And within that, there are certain technical parameters that have to enable the musicians to understand certain things like tempo, rhythm, and the tempo and rhythm and all such things, dynamics, they actually form the spirit of the performance, spirit of music. And he was focused on that all his life, and he was able to explain it. He would be able to teach an elephant to conduct if necessary. It was also a man of extraordinary tolerance and kindness and humor. And it's very important for the students. Teaching is a very noble profession that requires a very special gift that other professions don't necessarily require. And he had exactly that in him. He also realized that every student that he had was different from the others. Everybody has a different physique, different temperament, different way of expressing oneself. So he didn't try to copy his students to make another one copy of the one before. He actually recognized the differences. And then he would try to give each student the means to express themselves through conducting this or that music. So, in short, that is probably the best description of the man I could make. But there is something relating to Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony. And that is a true story. You see, when the war started in 1941, Leningrad Conservatory, professors and students, they were evacuated before Leningrad became completely encircled. And they were evacuated to the city of Tashkent in Uzbekistan. That is Central Asia. Ilya Musin, at that time, in those few preceding years before the war, he was actually conductor of the Minsk Philharmonic Orchestra in Belarus. When the war started, he was not in Leningrad, he was in Minsk, and so he and his wife, they were two of thousands of refugees fleeing from the approaching German army. And eventually he found himself also in Tashkent. Because prior to that, he actually was already professor of conducting at Leningrad Conservatory, from the 20s, so to speak. Anyway, they find themselves in Tashkent, and they hear a broadcast of this symphony that came from a performance played by NBC Symphony Orchestra in New York, conducted by Toscanini. The symphony, the score, was microfilmed and sent by diplomatic post from Moscow to Washington. And there were 3 conductors that were fighting for the rights to do the premiere performance. One of them was Toscanini, another one was Stokowski, and there was a third one. Toscanini won because he was conducting NBC Symphony Orchestra, which was a broadcasting company, which means the performance would be heard across the globe. And so when they played that symphony, the ones in Tashkent, they heard the broadcast, and they said, we must play it. How can they play it if they have no score? And the score was with Shostakovich, who himself was evacuated from Leningrad to the city of Kuibyshev, together with the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra. So one of those who was in Tashkent, who happened to be one of the closest friends of Shostakovich, his name was Glickman. He was sent to see Shostakovich and to fetch the score. That meant thousands of kilometers by train, and the trains at that time didn't have a schedule. They went when they could, and they haven't always arrived. He made the journey, he found Shostakovich, he got the score, and then he traveled back. Now they had the score, but they had no orchestra parts. And that's what Musin describes what happened. They organized long tables. They took the pages of the score, they took the score apart, page by page. They separated the pages. They put page after page on those long tables, and the professors and the students sat down and started copying orchestral parts, one by one. Ilya Musin was standing behind somebody who was copying page number 1, studying that page, because there was no another copy of the score, and this one was separated. When he felt that he knew enough of the first page, he moved to the next person who was copying the second page, and like that he learned the symphony. And then they rehearsed it, and then they performed it.
Wow, great story.
And when one thinks what it must have meant to those people to do something like this, to go to this length, Glickman risked his life. The others, well, we know what life must have been like in those conditions. And that shows you also, in a way, tells us, reminds us of the power of the music.
Yeah. Well, if I have understood it right, he is also an inventor of, renewer of a new way of conducting, not all those big swipes, but also a bit smaller and with a lot of body language. And can you tell us something more about it and what it did for you?
As I said, it is a philosophy of conducting gesture which contains the character, the spirit of the music, and those specific details that have to do with tempo, with rhythm, with dynamic, that make the spirit what it is. And the gesture must contain, if you will, that sound, the real sound. So, well, do you remember Sir George Solti?
Mm-hmm.
I adored him, I still do. George, his way of conducting, physical way of conducting, was incredibly hard. Which means that musicians playing, for example, string instruments, when they see a gesture like that, and at the same time they have to produce very singing cantilena, singing sound, but the gesture coming at them is so hard, they cannot resist it because it's physical. And that was the contradiction. He was, don't misunderstand me, it was a very great man, a very great artist, a very great conductor, and he had enormous qualities that I think all of us learn from. but there was a contradiction between the gesture
Yeah.
and the character of the music at certain moments. Musin always wanted the gesture to be specifically reflecting the character of the music at that moment.
We asked our concert friends to send in some questions. And Frank Linder, ik denk dat hij er is, there he is, has a question. He says, I understand that performing Shostakovich's 7th Symphony, named after your hometown Leningrad, is of special importance to your admiration for the composer and the connection to the city's history. Additionally, has your, well, there comes this is the definition, now the question. Additionally, has your Jewish background influenced your connection with Shostakovich, considering his interest in Jewish folklore and themes in the music?
Well, I think I should answer the second question first.
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly influence Shostakovich because the difference of age and stature is not quite the same. I also wouldn't be influenced by his interest in Jewish music. It's absolutely unrelated and unconnected. The fact that I'm born in a Jewish family, it's just, and somebody else is born in a Catholic family and somebody else is born in a Muslim family, those are private matters. But I don't think it gives anyone any special connection to music or anything else. So if you ask me about Shostakovich, yes, of course, I was born in Leningrad. My mother was born in Leningrad. My father was born in Ukraine. And when it comes to the 7th Symphony, something very special comes to mind. The symphony for me starts with the generation that were born in 1924. My two parents were born in the same year, in 1924. Why? Because 17 years later, that generation were graduating from high school. On the 21st of June, 1941, not only in Leningrad, everywhere in the country, there was a graduation ball. So those 17-year-olds, they were celebrating becoming adults. They were getting their diplomas, they could smoke. They could drink. They could get married. They dreamt to go to a university, or somebody wanted to get a job. Somebody else wanted to get married. Somebody else wanted nothing. And those were, all of them were dreamers. So on 21st of June 1941, they were celebrating that freedom of becoming adults. First it was in their schools, and then they went outside. In Leningrad specifically, at that time of the year, it's what one calls white nights. It doesn't get dark. You can read newspaper at 3 o'clock in the morning. So they go throughout the city, they celebrate, they dance, they drink, whatever. They go to the river, Neva. The bridges are open so that the boats could go through. And so that is the dream that they're living. And a few hours later, while they're still celebrating, they get the news that the country is attacked. And that was their welcome to life, to real life, to the generation born in 1924. I think of that. I think of my mother, who survived 900 days of siege of Leningrad. She didn't talk much about it. That whole generation who went through war, they didn't like talking about it. It was all their life they were trying to escape in their mind and their heart away from the experience that they received. So they didn't like talking about it much. But there was one episode, she told me, they were daily, many times in the day, bombing raids with the sirens announcing it, that the planes were coming. At that point, people would rush to hide in the cellars in the buildings. So that day, She rushed in the cellar of the building where she lived, together with the others, and the bomb hit the building. It went straight through and landed in the cellar where they were hiding. It did not explode. A miracle. I think of that. Then I think of that story of Ilya Musin and Seventh Symphony of Shostakovich, when they had to go and fetch the score. So when I tell you this, it's just to indicate that it isn't that Shostakovich is the most important composer in my life. No, he's not. He's one of many important composers with whom I live my whole life. But the idea is, and musicians have this expression, which I think is very true, is to know what is behind the notes. So the more one knows what's behind the notes, the more one hopes to be truthful to the intentions of the creator.
Well, funk. Well, can you tell us a bit more about your relationship with the Concertgebouworkest and also with the concert hall? How is it for you to conduct in such a beautiful concert hall and with such an exquisite orchestra? What does it mean to you?
It means joy. The atmosphere of this hall is, you know, all of us happen to be humans. All of us have stretches when we're incredibly well, and then there may be a day when we are less well, whether it's physically, emotionally, whatever. It's true to absolutely everyone. And sometimes you don't feel that you are in the peak of your form, emotionally or physically. And you ask yourself, how will I do it today? And then you go and you enter this noble building, and then you start going down the stairs, and you forgot already everything that crossed your mind before, because it brings its own energy. It's uplifting, it's inspiring. And then my very first experience here with the Concertgebouw Orchestra was 1984, so we are 40 years away, 41 years away. The one thing that amazed me, at the end of the first half of the concert, I already received a standing ovation. I felt I was the best thing since sliced bagel. Until somebody explained to me, nah, it's not like that. It's just the seeds are so hard.
And do you have special musical ideas which enhances the orchestra or the concert hall?
In fact, what happens is that every hall forms the sound of the orchestra that lives there. And every musician from this orchestra will tell you, we are formed by the sound of this hall. It is true everywhere. In Prague, our Czech Philharmonic Orchestra is formed by the sound of the Rudolfinum, which is one of those meccas that forms the sound of the orchestra. The same Vienna Philharmonic without Musikverein, or to an extent Concerthaus, would not sound the same. And it's true to all those great orchestras that live in great halls. It's simply a unity between the two. But then, of course, there are other things. There are great orchestras that don't have the privilege of having great hall, and they are still wonderful for other reasons. And there are others who don't play so well, even though they have fantastic conditions. So it's not a guarantee, but it is certainly a very important element in the history, in the tradition of sound and musicality of a collective that a symphony orchestra is.
I read that you will stop with the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra in 2028. And I'm very curious, are you going to stop totally, or what are you going to do after that? You're still not totally grey, so you have a lot to pass on in experience and so on. So, well, what are your plans?
I tell you, First of all, I'm not going to stop,
Okay.
because that would be, as it's called in America, cruel and unusual punishment.
Oh, great to hear.
No, it's just that at that time it will be 10 years of my tenure with the Czech Philharmonic, and I feel, and I felt it since 1 year, which is when I announced that I will not continue after 28, that, you know, when they asked me to become the chief conductor, music director, they said that, I quote, "You bring the best in us, and we want you to be our next music director, chief conductor, and we want you to be our daddy." The daddy was the one that actually forced me to change my mind, because I've been free for, by then, it must have been 7 years. And I love my freedom. It's the most important thing to me. But when they said, "We want you to be our daddy," how do you say no to 124
Children.
Yeah? So I said yes. And so those years, ever since, have been of such enormous value, both artistically as well as humanly, not only in Rudolfinum, but also with the community, with the city, with the public that is eager to receive what we want to give, what we can give. Every concert that I conduct there is sold out, and there are 3 of them for each program. It really tells you how people need it. It's not really about me. It's just in the DNA of the Czechs. And so this was that period of years. And then, you know, children, they grow up. And as a parent, I know very well that there will come a moment where, like little birds who get their wings and are able to fly, they should be allowed to fly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We bought you a lunch. You know them? There's stroopwafels.
Yes.
Very nice cookies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.